You're listening to the Curious About Cannabis podcast. It's a plant that goes by many names. Some call it hemp, some call it marijuana. Call it what you will, it's cannabis, and it's got a lot of people curious. Hey everybody, thanks so much for tuning in to this episode 0, a preview of the Curious About Cannabis podcast. My name's Jason Wilson. I'm the author of the Curious About Cannabis book and the host of the Curious About Cannabis podcast, coming fall 2019. I want to invite you on a journey with me as we try to cut through all of the hype and the hearsay to discover the truth about the world's most controversial plant, cannabis. We'll be talking to researchers, doctors, nurses, medical cannabis patients, growers, extraction chemists, and many others to critically examine essential questions about cannabis. So if you're curious about cannabis, don't miss out. Go ahead and subscribe to this podcast so you get notified right away when new episodes are released. Find us at cacpodcast.com or connect with us on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. Just search for Curious About Cannabis and I'm sure you'll find us. Check out this preview and don't forget to like and share this episode to spread the word.
Right. So in 1986, you could go in and lie to kids and
Right.
kind of like say whatever you wanted, but now they have Google, right?
Right,
So
they have their cell phones.
Yeah, they can fact check you in
Yep.
the moment. And it's interesting because a couple of years ago, I had a situation where I was presenting to a private high school to the seniors, and early on in the session, a student he said, does cannabis cause lung cancer? And I kind of, usually when that question comes up really early, it signals to me that someone has done their own research on that and they want to kind of get a sense of it. So I was just really straightforward. I said, we don't have data right now that shows that. We show that with chronic use, there is an increase in kind of, lung infections and people get sick more and they have a cough and things like that. There's chronic bronchitis that can occur, but we don't have data around that shows it causes lung cancer per se. I said we may in the future, especially if people are smoking concentrates a lot in a chronic way. We don't know exactly what that's going to entail, but right now that's where we're at. And it was really interesting. So after then we had the whole session, there was really good discussion, good conversation. And at the end, he came up, and a lot of students sometimes have questions after, and they'll talk to me. And he said, hey, I asked you that question to see if you were full of shit. So, it's an interesting that kind of testing the waters out to see, can I trust this person? Where are they at? And I also would say, if you critique the Nancy Reagan just say no, it doesn't mean that you're just say yes. Right. That there's people think that you're giving permission or being condoning this type of thing. Not at all. It's really important to think to holistically think critically about this entire issue. But if we go in, with fire and brimstone, and that's all the only approach we're going to take, it's generally not very valuable. And that said, I have concerns about young people, especially adolescents, using high potency cannabis products and smoking dabs and other things. I mean, there's issues with that, I think, that are very real that we need to critique and think about, especially at that age, especially with new emerging research about the brain and brain development and the different and the new products around cannabis, more potent products. So it's something we have to think about and can't get completely dogmatic about.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And what I would say with this, it's like, there's nuance to it, right? There's nuance to this entire conversation around cannabis, but people love things in kind of, we're in this time where it's kind of like, we get our information from a headline on social media, let alone going to an article that wrote about that came up with that headline, and then let alone going to the research article that informed that pop culture article. It's not really happening. Everything is kind of like this. We're getting information from headlines and memes. Just yesterday, my daughter was like, hey, did you know Joe Rogan's running for president in 2020? I was like, that's not happening. She's like, I saw a meme about it. I'm like, oh my gosh, please do not get your information from memes. And I do not think that's true at all. I've heard nothing about that. So it's like, it's just interesting what I have found, and I talk about this quite a bit whenever I present to whatever age group. I talk about confirmation bias, and I say of a confirmation bias essentially is we seek out and find information and research that already confirms our pre-existing beliefs and ideas about something, and we do this politically. We do it with a lot of things. Cannabis is really prominent with that. What I found that people who are really pro are only pro, and it's really hard for them to really hear. So it doesn't surprise me that people get mad at you. It's hard for them to hear or be exposed to other information. And the people who are really anti are like, yep, should be Schedule I federally, should be prohibited. No one should ever use it, has no medical application, et cetera. So the confirmation bias people step into around this topic, I think, is really prominent. But we do this with so many things. So like most things, it's not black and white.
Right.
There's complicated aspects to it. And that's for me, when I do any kind of education, specifically when I'm doing it with like high schoolers or young college students, I ask them to really think critically about health and wellness and who they are as people. That to me, it's like I have this flow chart that I have, if you're making a decision about substance use, and it's just all these questions that no one ever, I don't think a lot of times we're asking young people to think about, where am I at mentally, physically, and socially in my health right now? How will this decision I'm making impact that? What's the purity? What's the dosage? Who am I going to be with? What's my mindset going into it? What's the setting I'm going to be around? What would the people in my life who love and care about me feel about the decision I'm making? What impact could this have on my life in general, good, bad, or indifferent? Like just run through a series of questions for them to really process this and think about it. Because it's so much of this now, we have to keep encouraging people to think critically about their decision making and their life and their health, and not just kind of get on a team and say, that's the team I'm on, I'm going with it.
You've been listening to a preview of the Curious About Cannabis podcast. To learn more about the Curious About Cannabis podcast, visit cacpodcast.com or connect with Curious About Cannabis on social media on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. The Curious About Cannabis podcast is presented by Natural Learning Enterprises, a science education company dedicated to the enhancement of public scientific literacy through education about the natural world. Curious About Cannabis is just one of several learning initiatives produced by Natural Learning Enterprises. To learn more, go to www.naturallearningenterprises.com or connect with NLE on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter.